And a new pact between the US and Papua New Guinea granting expanded access to American forces on airfields and ports as Washington plays catch-up with Beijing in the Pacific. And for more on this US-Papua New Guinea Defense Pact, we're joined by Blake Herzinger. He is a research fellow for the Foreign Policy and Defense at the United States Studies Center. Mr. Herzinger, the framing from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, signing this deal has been this is a partnership across the board with Papua New Guinea, so it includes $45 million to strengthen cooperation on security, the economy, climate change mitigation, tackling transnational crime, and matters such as HIV/AIDS. But all the focus, whether in terms of praise or criticism within the region and outside the region, has been on the military aspect. Is Mr. Blinken being disingenuous by not emphasizing the military aspect of this deal?
I wouldn't say so at all, Wei Su. I think he is right to mention kind of the comprehensive nature of these agreements. They are not solely focused upon military aims. Of course, we do have to consider them within the larger context of strategic competition, with the PRC and Washington seeking expanded access, different relationships, new kinds of working together with countries in the Pacific Islands and across the Indo-Pacific, really. But this is a very broad relationship, and it highlights Washington's interest in being a security partner and a comprehensive partner for the long term with Papua New Guinea. And I think that's reflected in the agreement that Mr. Blinken signed, as well as the maritime security agreement that they signed.
All right, but surely one consideration might be the Solomon Islands, about 2,000 kilometers away, separated by water, which has a security pact signed, I suppose, considered controversially last year with China. And the fact that we had the Chinese foreign minister last year around this time making a tour of that region, trying to persuade all the different countries to sign a sweeping trade and security agreement. Surely security is a very big part of U.S. considerations.
It is absolutely a way, Sue. That's absolutely true. Security is something that matters to both parties. And I think we've actually seen kind of in the post-Sogavare PRC relationship that a lot of the region has sort of leaned away from these kinds of relationships with Beijing because, in a manner of speaking, in a lot of ways, Beijing is the security threat that a lot of countries are worried about. Now, the Sogavare regime in Solomon Islands is tied increasingly tightly with Beijing, and it's looked upon fairly negatively the world round. It's a very personalist type of relationship. It's not one that I would say necessarily benefits Solomon Islands as a whole, but it's certainly benefiting Mr. Sogavare and his compatriots. And I think, as you mentioned, kind of with the larger Pacific Islands agreement that Beijing tried to put through with Wang Yi last year, that was met with resounding failure, I think that highlights the direction that the region is looking and what kind of region they want to live in, whether it's one that's dictated by force and by size and by intimidation, or by the rule of law and equality under international law.
So fears within the region that being forced to choose sides, as it were, is that fear being overplayed, or do you think that is no worse than it has ever been in the history of the Pacific Islands?
Well, I think, as residents of Singapore, we're very familiar with the kind of refrain about not making countries choose. That's something that we hear in Southeast Asia. We hear it also in the Pacific Islands. And I think it's important to look at how Secretary Blinken framed this arrangement as something comprehensive, not as something exclusive. It's certainly intended to support the sovereignty and the prosperity of Papua New Guinea, but without restricting its possibilities and restricting its economic prospects. It doesn't come with any, ties or restrictions on who Papua New Guinea and Port Moresby can partner with in the future, who they can trade with. It is a comprehensive and, I think, well thought out agreement that benefits both parties, certainly. And like you said, we can't ignore the security aspect, but countries make decisions regarding their own security every day. And they don't have to be exclusive, but they will make choices. And they don't have to cut off further engagement with other parties, which is, again, I think why we saw, backs turned against the broader security partnership that Beijing floated last year, is because In other regions, Beijing has proposed new security architectures which do exclude external parties, as they put it, countries from outside Asia. And the United States very much views itself as an Indo-Pacific power, and it expects to be present in the region for the long term. And I think partners are happy to hear that and happy to sign agreements that bind the United States in for the long term.
And a final question here, Mr. Herzinger, perhaps diluting this concern that we have in this region as well about being made to choose, where Prime Minister Modi, in the absence of President Biden, essentially being the main figure at this forum today in the Pacific Islands, where the language, our correspondent earlier was pointing out, he was hailed as the leader of the global South, and James Marape, that's of course PNG's Prime Minister, promising to rally behind it as Modi held a summit there with Pacific Island leaders. So Mr. Modi there, a third party, not Washington, not Beijing. How do you see that dynamic with Mr. Modi making quite a splash there in Papua New Guinea?
Well, I was very encouraged to hear that, Wei Su, and I thought that Prime Minister Modi's visit, it was well-timed. There's a lot happening in the region, obviously, with the G7, various different Quad arrangement meetings happening. And for him to be present at this summit with the Pacific Islands and to be greeted the way he was, I think is a positive sign of India providing kind of another pillar of support across a region where India is a crucial player. He pledged in some of his remarks to continue supporting the region, continue trading, continue exchanging and working together. And I think, that security environment that we were talking about, that strategic competition, it does blunt some of those charges to have the Indian Prime Minister also there, right alongside Prime Minister Marape. We're going to work together for the future. I love the language that he used with respect to the Pacific Island countries, not that they're small nations, but that they're large ocean states and that they are connected to India by the ocean. And I think that really highlights kind of this Indo-Pacific, kind of the free and open nature of the Indo-Pacific that these partners like the United States, India, Australia, and Japan are looking for to help knit these countries into a broader framework where they are protected by the rule of law and they are allowed to pursue their own prosperity and protect their own sovereignty.
Thanks so much for joining us, Blake Herzinger, Research Fellow for Foreign Policy and Defense at the United States Studies Center.